Now we're going to be looking at what I call scoreboard. We're going to be once again adding and subtracting integers, which is adding and subtracting whole numbers. Some of them are positive, some of them are negative. And people tend to get confused with this. We have like 8 minus a negative 2 minus 4. Now, the idea on this, I'm going to call it scoreboard. And the reason why is because you guys know how to read scoreboards from sports, right? If I look at the sports from this last weekend, I can look at the scoreboards and I can see what we're interested on the scoreboard is who won by how many points. So the way I'm going to do this, first of all, let me write everything without parentheses. If I see two negative signs, so something like a 2 minus something, if I see two negative signs, I'm going to write that as a positive sign, right? Two negative signs make a positive sign. Now, if I see the signs that are different, kind of like a plus and then a negative, or a negative with a positive, if I see the signs are different, I'm going to write each of them as a minus. So once again, if I see two negative signs, I write that as a plus. If I see a positive and a negative, I write that as a minus. So I'm going to write everything without parentheses. So question number 5, I'm going to write that as 8. Then I have a minus 8. Then I have a plus 2, right? Two negative signs make a positive. And then minus 4. Now, I just said I was going to look at this as a scoreboard. What I think of this is, imagine there's a game, whatever sport you like, where the positives are playing the negatives. I'm going to separate the positives with the negatives. Now, I'm going to separate my numbers, positives and negatives. My first number is positive 8, so let me write it with the positive. The second number is a negative 8, so let me write it with the negatives. The third number is a positive 2, let me write it with the positives. And my last number is a negative 4. Let me write it with the negatives. Now, imagine this is a scoreboard. Now, for the positive, let me add all the positives. 8 plus 2. I'm just focused on the positive numbers. 8 plus 2. That gives me 10. The negatives, let me add the negatives. 8 plus 4. That gives me 12. So first, I added those numbers that had the same sign. I added the positives, and then I added the negatives. My final question here it is, who won by how many? It seems like the positives have 10 points, and the negatives have 12 points. Once again, my question here it is, who won by how many points? Obviously, the negatives won, so my answer will be a negative, because 12 is bigger than 10. Now, by how many? Subtract those two numbers. I'm going to say, in this case, the negatives won by 2. And my answer would be negative 2. Let's take a look at question number 6. Let me write everything without parentheses. So I have a 1, minus 6, minus 1. Remember, when the signs are different, a positive and a negative, I write it as minus. And then plus 8. Once again, two negatives make a positive sign. All right, so let me separate positives with negatives. Positives and negatives. The first number is positive, so I'm going to put it with the positives. The 6 is negative, so I'm going to put it with the negatives. The 1 is negative, so I'm going to put it in the negatives. And the 8 is positive. At the end, let me add my positives. When I add positives, 1 plus 8 is 9. When I add the negatives, 6 plus 1 is 7. So now here, the positives have 9 points, the negative have 7 points. My question is, who won by how many? The positives in this case won by 2. I'm going to leave the 2 as a positive to specify the positives won, and they won by 2. Okay, let's take a look at another game. Now, question number 7. And I call it game because I'm going to first of all write them as positives or negatives without parentheses. So I have 2 minus 5 minus 7 plus 3. Remember, two negative signs make a positive sign. Let me separate them as a positives and negatives. My first number is positive, so 2. Then negative 5, let me put it with the negatives. Negative 7, and then positive 3. When I add my positives, let me make a little box here. When I add my positives, 2 plus 3 is 5. When I add my negatives, 5 plus 7 is 12. Remember my answer here, I'm going to ask who won by how many points? Right? The positive score 5, the negative score 12. I'm going to say the negative is 1. Now, by how many? Subtract those two numbers, 12 minus 5. So I'm going to say the negatives 1 by 7. Lastly, let's take a look at question number 8. Let me write this as a minus 4 minus 6 plus 3 minus 1. I'm going to separate positives with negatives. Negative 4, so I'm going to put it with the negatives. Negative 6, I'm going to put in the negatives. Positive 3, and then negative 1. Let me create a box at the end. Positives, I only have a 3. Negatives, 4 plus 6 plus 1, I have 11. All right, my question here is who won by how many points? I'm going to say the negatives won by 8. The 8 because I subtracted my numbers, right? 11 minus 3 is 8. Now negatives because the negatives won. So once again, my question is always who won by how much? If they happen to be a tied, because sometimes you might have a tied, like let's say I have a game, positives and negatives, and I have like the positives with 2 and 3 and the negatives with 1 and 4. My final score is 5-5. When there's a tie, I'm just going to write 0. You might run into those. Like I said, my question is who won by how much? If there happens to be a tie, I'm just going to write 0.